Okay. Okay, as you know, I'm the host, so I have to keep on looking to the participants to let people in. Okay. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Hasidut. Tonight we are finishing our series on Maaseh Merkavah, workings of the Chariot. I want to make sure, though, before we start, one of our regulars, Robert Berman, is in the hospital right now, having some medical issues. So I want to dedicate our learning for a refuah shlema for Yaakov Shimshon ben Beryl B'Moshe. So, Robert, I hope at some point you're going to hear and watch this video. And we are praying for you at the end of the class. I'll try to get everyone also. That Yaakov Shimshon ben Beryl B'Moshe should have a refuah shlema and be back online with us very, very quickly. Last week, we dedicated the learning to, in a certain way, going back and reviewing many of the things that we've learned, but from the perspective of Kabbalah and Hasidut. We're in like a summation, concluding mode here right now. And so I'm going to be mentioning things that we've learned before and some new things, and then have some concluding thoughts. And in a certain way, the concluding thoughts are among the most important part of this entire series, because one of the fundamentals of Hasidut is we always have to personalize whatever we're learning. So we've been learning these deep mystical secrets from many, many different angles and perspectives. But ultimately, the idea is, well, what do we do with all of this? How do we integrate it? How does it become relevant to us? And that will be in our end of the class concluding words. But I'm saying already that these are among the most important things that we've learned this entire series will be in those concluding words. So we're going to start where we left off last week, where according to Kabbalah, one of the main, call it secrets of Maaseh Merkavah is the idea of permuting letters. And we learned that because the word Merkavah, the root, also means murkav, which means complex, which means putting things together to work properly. And so since all Torah learning is based on the text, the letters and the words and the verses of the Torah, but ultimately it's coming from the letters and the words. And each letter is a vehicle, is a chariot, a Merkavah of God's light and energy and will. And so, according to Kabbalah, when we're talking about Maaseh Merkavah, that along with everything that we've learned is this whole idea of permuting letters and words and seeing added perspectives. Shivim panim LaTorah, 70 faces to the Torah. So last week we learned about permutations, and many different examples that we brought. But what I didn't bring, and I want to make sure that I do, is I mentioned that the three-letter root of Merkavah, Bet Chaf Resh, is one of only 7 words, 7 three-letter roots in the entire Hebrew language that can be permuted in all 6 ways. As we learned, when you have 3 letters, you can permute them in 6 different ways. But what we didn't have a chance to get to are the 6 permutations of the root word of Merkavah, of chariot. And that's what we're going to do right now. And so this is from Rav Ginsburg, and he's aligned them according to the Sfirot. That we're not going to go into, but I'm going to start. Bet Chaf Reish forms the word Bechor, firstborn. And this is obviously a very important concept in the Torah. It's mentioned over and over again. The idea of the Bechor, the firstborn. That's the first permutation of these 3 letters that ultimately form the word Merkavah. The next one is one of the ones that we've had throughout the entire Maaseh Merkavah, and that are the Kruvim, the type of angel. And that permutation is Chaf Reish Bet, Karuv. That are the Kruvim. We discussed this at length. The idea here is not to go into deep discussion here, but just to review what are the 7 permutations of the 3-letter root for Merkavah, the chariot. That was Gevura. And we saw actually the Kruvim have this aspect of Gevura. In Tiferet, it's Reish Bet Chaf. And this forms the word Mur Bechet. And this is a type of one of the meal offerings that was brought in the temple. And it's very hard to translate this word, but it was a kind of meal offering that it sounds like when you make braided challah. It's not just a regular bread that's just one lump. It's made up of anywhere from 3 to 6 different strands of dough that are woven together. That seems to be the meaning of this permutation of the 3-letter root of Merkavah. In Netzach, we have a very important one. It is the root of Bet Reish Chaf is bracha, blessing. So this is such an important connection to the chariot here. And we're going to discuss this further. The idea of blessing comes from the 3-letter root. In Hod, it's kavar. Kavar means already. But in our terms, this is the name of the river that Yechezkel had his vision, the river Kavar. So now we already see that 2 of the permutations are fundamental to the whole story of Maaseh Merkavah. The first one were the Kruvim. The second one was the river where he had this vision, Nahar Kavar. And the last one is Reish Chaf Bet, Rechev, which is the root of Merkavah, a vehicle. In modern Hebrew, a Rechev is an automobile. So here we've gone quickly, but here we see that the beautiful connections here, the same root that is the root of the chariot is also the root of the river where Yechezkel had his vision of the chariot. It is the root of these very important angels who play a part in the Maaseh Merkavah, the Kruvim. And of course, the idea of blessing, which we will discuss even further. So that's one idea. basically I'm giving over individual ideas here. It's not like one particular flow. So since we mentioned the river Kvar, we need to delve into it a little bit deeper. It's not like a coincidence, or the book of Yecheskel just happens to mention the name of this river. So Kvar means something in the past already, the river of something from the past. So that could be totally, because there are only 6 permutations of a 3-letter root. There are 7 words that can be permuted in 6 different ways. So let's discuss this river. What is the already? So it's connected to 2 very important things. One is the crossing of the Reed Sea. At the crossing of the Reed Sea, this is when we left Egypt, and Egypt followed us with the intention of wiping us out. And we were like stuck at the sea. And God performed a miracle. The sea opened, we went through. And then when we got to the other side, the Egyptians followed us, and the waters returned on them, and they were wiped out. And then Moshe and all the people sang a song. In other words, they had, we'll call it a mass experience of divine inspiration to sing one of the 10 archetypal songs sung throughout all creation. But the reason I'm mentioning this is a very, very well-known statement by our sages that the simplest maidservant at the sea saw more than Yecheskel saw in his vision of the chariot. Excuse me. So in other words, this is part of what we've discussed many times, this idea that the vision of Ezekiel is only one manifestation of the bigger subject called the workings of the chariot. So here we see at the Reed Sea, which is approximately 800 years before Yecheskel, the people had as it were, a vision of the Merkavah, everyone. It was like a mass vision of the Merkavah. So this is one of the meanings when it says the river Kavar. It's alluding to the idea of Maseh Merkavah is an energy, is a consciousness that pre-existed Yecheskel's vision. The other thing it's connected to are the 4 rivers that came out of Eden. And we're told, our sages tell us, that all water in the world have their source in these 4 rivers. And these 4 rivers actually were one river. Because it says a river came out of Eden, and it's split into 4 heads. And I believe we discussed this already. This is alluding to the 4 letters of God's name. And all the 4s that we learned about in Maseh Merkavah, this idea of out of oneness come the 4 forces of the physical universe and the 4 letters of God's name and all the other physical phenomena that have to do with the number 4 that we discussed at length. And the other connection is, again, the river that was already. Now, we have discussed many times the connection between Yecheskel's vision and the mass vision of the people at Mount Sinai. that we've discussed many times. Just like we said tonight, at the sea, the people had a mass together vision of divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh. Well, the same thing happened at Mount Sinai. And here we're talking about 3 million people having a simultaneous vision of Maseh Merkavah in this higher level of consciousness. So why, but what does it have to do with the river where Yechezkel had his vision? So the giving of the Torah is explained in Parshat Yitro, in the book of Exodus. But then in the book of Deuteronomy, it reviews the Ten Commandments and the whole experience at Sinai. And there, in just one verse, it's not mentioned before or afterwards, that there was a river, actually it's called a stream, a nachal, that came out from Mount Sinai. Now, this is very, very significant in symbolic terms, because Torah is always compared to water. Ein mayim el Torah. There's no water mentioned in the Torah that's not a hint to Torah itself. So it almost seems natural that from Mount Sinai, there would be a nachal. And I think, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but I was at a place that many people think was Mount Sinai. It has not been proven. There are different opinions, but I was at this place, and all I could say is, if it was or wasn't the place, it sure felt like it was the place. It was a very, very holy place. And to my amazement, there was a stream flowing at the foot of Mount Sinai, which I was not prepared for that experience, but there it was. So here, again, we're all trying to discuss, why is this river called the river that was already? Because Maaseh Merkavah, the workings of the chariot, have their roots going all the way back to our patriarchs, as we've discussed. And since we mentioned our patriarchs, so the first one is Abraham. And Abraham in the Torah is called Avram HaIvri, Avram the Hebrew. And Ivri comes from the word la'avor, to pass over, to cross over. And we were given two reasons why is he called Avram the Hebrew. Is because he came from the east. Ur Kasdim, his birthplace, is in what's called the east. Today it's in what's called Iraq. And in Iraq is the Euphrates River. In the Torah, it's called Nahar Parat. And Avram, when he left Ur Kasdim, he had to cross over the Euphrates to come to Israel. And in those days, crossing the Euphrates was maybe like crossing the Pacific Ocean before there were large boats. It was this huge demarcation between the east and, we'll call it now, the west. And Avram crossed over. So the simple understanding is called Avram HaIvri. He left Ur Kasdim and he went to Israel. And the other one, which is similar but much deeper, is on a level of consciousness, a level of spirituality. Avram crossed over a line that no one else had crossed over. He's the father of monotheism. And we learned a lot more about Avram in this series and his connection to mystical teachings, and especially the foundations of what is called Maaseh Merkavah. the workings of the chariot. So all of this are allusions to why this river is called the Nahar, the river of Kvar, because it's connected to the river that came out of Gan Eden. It, especially because of the fours, as discussed at length, its connection to Sinai, and its connection to Avram Avinu, because in Sefer Yetzirah is in a certain way the foundation of what later would be called Maseh Merkavah. So that's from Kabbalah and Chassidut, is helping us fill in what might seem like just a little detail. The name of the river was Nahar Kavar, but here we see that it's not just a little detail, it has tremendous significance. Now, the next idea is something that I just came across in the last few weeks, and it was a huge new idea for me in relationship to Maseh Merkavah. Now, to lead up to this, we've discussed throughout the series that the entire context of his vision, as stated in the opening verses, was he was in exile. Yechezkel was in exile. He was exiled by the Babylonians right before the destruction of the temple. And in the first chapter of Yechezkel, we don't see any overt connection to the temple, other than that's the context. He's in exile, being taken to Babylonia, and then shortly after the temple is destroyed. But when we expanded our context and we reviewed the first 11 chapters of Yechezkel, then we saw how important the entire vision he was having and the context was in context of the destruction of the temple, especially starting approximately chapter 8, 9, 10, and 11, when Yechezkel was taken in a vision back to Jerusalem, and God was showing him what would happen and why it was happening. And so the context of the temple is very important. So that we've discussed. So it actually happened when I was preparing for our Sunday class on the book of Kings. And I came across the description of the building of the first temple. And for those who come to the Sunday class, in the next few weeks, we're going to get to exactly what we're learning here. But here, and I'll just do it in short, in the 6th and 7th chapter, so it mentions in the description of the temple. So give me one second. Oh, I see. So in the 6th chapter, talking about how Solomon is building the temple, the 23rd verse. So it says, it describes in many, many verses the kruvim that Shlomo made in the temple. Now, in the Mishkan, on the top of the Holy Ark, there were 2 kruvim. We learned about this in great depth. These 2 angelic figures facing each other with their wings spread out. But they were relatively small, and they were on the covering of the ark. And it was between the 2 kruvim where the voice of God came out to communicate with Moshe. So obviously this is of utmost importance. But here, when Shlomo is building the Mishkan, he makes these huge kruvim that were sitting on the floor, covering the entire Holy of Holies with their wings. And so this is very, very significant that it doesn't mean that the kruvim on the ark weren't there, but he made these additional kruvim to cover over the ark, the whole thing. And they were relatively huge. But it's not only that. In the 7th chapter, so it says that Shlomo made what's called dam. In the temple, he made this like huge holding pool. This was not in the Mishkan. This was an innovation of Shlomo. And as we learned actually a few days ago, he was already given instructions from David and from Shmuel how to build the temple. And you see that he made this huge pool, but they were sitting on 12 images of oxen. Now, if you remember, in the 4 faces of the chariot, one of the faces was the ox. And here it says that there were 3 on each side looking in each direction, which is very similar to the idea of the 4 faces that Yechezkel saw, each one in a different direction. And again, there's a lot of details here. And then in the 36th verse of the 7th, it says that as part of this huge holding pool, that he engraved kruvim and lions and palm trees. So all of a sudden now you have the oxen and you have the lions. So I thought that was very significant. But then I went back to the Mishkan. Because the temple, Shlomo made innovations. But it was still basically the model of the Mishkan. So in the book of Shemot, in Parshat Truma, in the 26th chapter, the 1st verse, so it says, now it's going to talk about the curtains that were around and above the holy place, the sanctuary. And it says like this, Ve'eta mishkan ta'aseh eser yiriot, shesh mashtar v'techela v'argaman v'tolat shani, kruvim ma'aseh choshev ta'aseh otam. God commanded Moshe, to make 10 curtains of different colors, of fine linen and blue and purple and scarlet, with kruvim. In other words, these, excuse me one second. These curtains had embroidered kruvim. So here, again, it's like we see in the Mishkan and the temple, we're starting to see the images that Yechezkel sees all these years later, approximately 800 years later. And this shows us the primordial roots of Maseh Merkavah. But then Rashi says something which was astounding on this verse. Rashi, when he's explaining this embroidery, so he says, not only were there kruvim, he says, but there were also embroidered lions and eagles. when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, these are the images that Yechezkel sees. And then the connection with the context of the temple being destroyed, and Yechezkel is being given this vision right before the temple is destroyed, as if to say, and we mentioned this many times, that even though, if you look at it historically, that could have been the end of the Jewish people. The temple is destroyed. The Babylonians have basically taken over Israel. The people have been exiled to Babylonia. That could have been the end. Just like so many other peoples in the world, when they're exiled from their land, they end up assimilating, disappearing from history. And we learn this, and that's one of the reasons why God is granting Yechezkel this vision right now, as if to say, it looks really bad, it looks like the end. It's not the end. There will be a continuity here. And so when I read this, the combination of Shlomo and the first temple, but here in the Mishkan, Rashi is saying that these images of the Kruvim, the eagle and the lion, were embroidered in the curtains of the holy place. I was like, I hadn't really caught that deep connection. And so I wanted to bring it because it's almost crucial to understanding the entire context of everything that we've been learning. Okay, now we're going to go to another idea. As I said, this is a series of ideas with a connection to Kabbalah and Hasidut. So the next two ideas are from, and I've shown you this book before. This is Rav Ginsburg's book on really Maaseh Bereshit. 913 is the gematria of the word Bereshit, the secret wisdom of Genesis. In the book, he says the following. He says that there are 5 types of Torah learning, and they correspond to the 5 levels of the soul. And so the connections are pretty straightforward, that the Tanakh, the basic of all Jewish learning, goes back to the Tanakh. That it corresponds to the nefesh. That's like the foundation. That's the basic. In fact, many times, even though many people, when you talk about soul, will say neshama, but in the Torah it's nefesh. Nefesh is the general term for all levels of the soul, even though in particular it's, as it were, the lowest level of the soul. But we wouldn't call the Tanakh the lowest level. It's just the basis of everything. The Ruach is the Mishnah. The Mishnah is really the first recorded oral Torah. In 200 CE, Yehuda Nasi compiles the written form of the oral tradition, which had been handed down literally orally from Sinai, 1,500 years, and even before. And then it was written down. So that's the Ruach. That becomes the spirit of the oral tradition. The third level is Gemara, the Talmud. The Talmud is every tractate begins with a Mishnah, and then the Gemara tries to explain the Mishnah. So that's the next level of learning, and that connects to the neshama. And the neshama is always connected to the intellect. And anyone who is familiar with Gemara, this is like the epitome of intellectual prowess, is learning Talmud. That's neshama. And then on the level of chai, these are the three what are called conscious levels of learning. And then there is the Ma'aseh Bereshit. And this is the chaya of the soul, the life force. And so the workings of creation, obviously we're getting into the inner dimensions of the Torah, the supra-conscious levels of learning Torah. And that's called Ma'aseh Bereshit, and that's the chaya. And then the highest level is Ma'aseh Merkavah. And that's what's called the Yechidah Shebenefesh, the point of godliness within the soul. So here we see 5 levels of soul represented almost perfectly with 5 ascending levels of learning. Now, so that we don't make any mistakes here, all 5 are needed. You can't just jump to Ma'aseh Merkavah. It is a ladder. One has to have the background and has to have the knowledge. The more one knows, the higher one climbs on the ladder. So Rav Ginsburg, I'm just going to bring one of many, many deep ideas here. He wants to show in a very deep way what's the connection with Ma'aseh Bereshit being connected to the chaya of the soul. Now the chaya is the life force. Chai means life. And of course, Ma'aseh Bereshit is about the creation of all life, starting with the inanimate, the mineral world, and then going to the vegetable, and then the animal, and then the human. But the last 3 we recognize as being alive, but according to Kabbalah and Chassidut, even the mineral world is considered, it has life force from God. It could not exist without life force from God. So everything is alive. I refer everyone to my book, Life, Soul, and Consciousness Within All Creation. The whole book is based on this idea. I just want to say that, to my great delight, Robert Berman just joined the class. And Robert, I want you to know, when you listen to this from the beginning, we started the class with a dedication for a refuah shlema for you. We'll talk about it more after the class. I'm delighted to see that you've joined us. I'm delighted, and you have your camera on, and everyone can see Robert there. And after in our discussion, we'll get back to you. So glad you're with us. Okay, so Rav Ginsburg is pointing out, so what's the connection with Ma'aseh Bereshit and Chaya? So I just explained it. It makes perfect sense. It's about God creating life. But Rav Ginsburg points out an amazing thing. In the account of creation, from Bereshit to the end of Shabbat, there are 469 words. Any odd number will have a middle point. And for anyone who wants to know the importance of middle points of verses, passages, books, and the whole Torah, go to the book 70 Faces. There's a whole chapter on the middle letter, the middle word, and the importance. So Rav Ginsburg points out, if you have 469 words, the middle word is the 235th word. What is the 235th word? The first appearance of the word chaya. So here he's just bringing this amazing, I'll call it mathematical gem, a numerical gem of the connection of Maseh Bereshit with the level of soul called chaya. Okay, now another idea from Rav Ginsburg, and this is going to help us kind of tie everything together. And that is, we discussed already the idea that the first verse of the Torah has 7 words and 28 letters. And the introductory verse for the 10 Commandments is 7 words and 28 letters. And both of them mention the name of God is Elohim. From that, we get a whole involved discussion of the connection of creation and the giving of the Torah at Sinai. And in short, what we learned from Rashi is that the giving of the Torah is the fulfillment of the purpose of creation. That's why these 2 verses are like soulmates. They're tied together. And if you remember the Rashi in Shabbat of creation, it says Yom HaShishi, Vayi Erev, Vayi Voker, Yom HaShishi. And so Rashi points out that none of the other days says Yom HaSheni, Yom HaShlishi, meaning the with a capital T. So why does the 6th day have to say, why doesn't it just say it was evening, it was day? The 6th day without the 6th day. And he explains because it's alluding to another 6th day. What other 6th day? The 6th of Sivan, the day that the Torah is given. And Rashi says that God said to the Jewish people, if you receive, first Rashi says, all of creation was like hanging in the balance until we received the Torah at Sinai. And God said to the Jewish people, if you receive the Torah today, good. And if not, I will return the world to tohu vavohu. In other words, there's no purpose to the world without the moral, ethical compass that was revealed at Sinai. So here we have these 2 verses that are connected, 7 words, 28 letters. Now, Rav Ginsburg brings that there are 2 other verses in the Torah that directly connect to Maseh Merkavah that also have 7 words and 28 letters. And that is Genesis 17:22. And the verse is, V'yichal ledaber ito, v'ya'al Elokim me'al Avraham. Here, the context is God is speaking to Avraham. And it says that God finished speaking to him, meaning to Avram, and Elokim rose up from Avraham. He ascended like above Avraham. So that verse has 7 words and 28 letters. And there's another verse with Yaakov that has 7 words and 28 letters. And that is Genesis 35:13. And it says in Hebrew, it says, V'ya'al me'alav Elokim, b'makom asher diber ito. In other words, you'll see that the two verses are almost identical in their meaning. The first one is God was speaking to Avram, he finishes, and now he ascends, call it like the vision is over. He ascends from Avram. With Yaakov, it's that God arose or ascended from above him, from the place that he was speaking with him. So now the question is, what do these verses have to do with the other verses that have 7 words and 28 letters? And remember, we discussed that in relationship to one to the other, the workings of creation leads to Maaseh Merkavah at Sinai. That relative one to the other, Sinai is like Maaseh Merkavah, and creation is Maaseh Bereshit. So we already made that connection. And here, both of these verses have God ascending from one of the patriarchs. And so this is connected to the statement of Chazal that we've talked about. Ha'avot hen hamerkavah. The patriarchs, they are the chariot. So here, this kind of brings us full circle. Yechezkel is having this vision, and he sees different angels. He sees the Ophanim, he sees the Chariot, he sees the Chashmal, he sees the Noga, fire and light and rainbow colors and everything. And then he sees the throne of God. And the whole idea is that the chariot is carrying the throne of God. And then at the end of the first chapter, he sees the glory of God. He falls on his face, and God begins to speak to him. So here we see God is speaking to Avram. God is speaking to Yaakov. And in both cases, he ascends, like on a Merkavah. So this is a very, very deep understanding when we say that the patriarchs, they are the chariot. In a few minutes, we're going to see how that applies to each and every one of us. And that's why I'm bringing it here, because it's like the foundation of what we're going to get to our conclusion. Now, there's only one more idea I want to bring, and then the concluding thoughts. And I might go a little bit longer than usual because I need to get this all out. And that is one of the most mysterious parts of Ezekiel's vision. And there are many mysterious parts. Is, again, as I just said, he sees the Ophanim, he sees the Chariot, he sees this transported consciousness, sees the Chashmal and the Noga and the rainbow, all and the fire and all of this. But then on this chariot, he sees the appearance of an Adam. Now, we would have expected at that point that he sees a vision of God, because right afterwards, after he sees this Adam, then it says that he saw the glory of God, and then he fell down, and God began to speak to him. So the mystery is, who is this Adam here? What is he seeing here? We discussed this already, but it's important to come back and bring in this idea that the divine soul is a chelak Eloka mima'al mamash, an actual part of God above. And so the Adam that he's seeing it could be interpreted that he's seeing this world called Adam Kadmon, which we've discussed is the fifth world. Usually we talk about four Kabbalistic worlds: the world of action, the world of formation, higher and higher, the world of creation, the world of emanation, and then there's this world called Adam Kadmon, primordial man. This is not Adam Arishon. There's a connection to Adam Rishon, and that is what Yechezkel is seeing. He's seeing, in a certain way, he's seeing a mirror image of his highest being. Because remember, this is a vision. It's like Lech Lecha. God says to Avram, go to yourself. There's an outside journey and there's an inside journey. So Yechezkel is seeing outside phenomena, but in a certain way, it's all happening just in his head, in his consciousness. There is nothing out there. It's all in his consciousness. But at the same time, he is seeing something out there. It's part of the paradox. But the fact that at this high point of the vision, where we would think now he has this vision of God, but first he has the vision of Adam. And that is really the highest ideal, the highest level of super consciousness, the level of the divine soul, the point of godliness, when it says that we're created b'tselem Elokim. So Yechezkel, because his consciousness is being transported from one world to the other, even though we've said that in general, his whole experience of the Merkavah is happening in the world of formation, Olam Yitzirah. But in the world of Yitzirah are all the other worlds also. And so here he's seeing Adam Kadmon, primordial man, in the world of Yitzirah. But in the deeper level, he's seeing his inside potential, his godly soul. And only then does it say he sees the glory of God, and that's when he understands he's in the total presence of God. This is a little bit like Yaakov's dream of the ladder, where he sees angels ascending and descending. And we discuss this here, just like all the angels in Yechezkel's vision of the Merkavah. For Yaakov, his dream of the ladder is his experience of the Merkavah. And who is at the top of the ladder? Hashem. And then Hashem speaks to him. But first, he's very involved. And we discussed these midrashim of these angels going up and down, and each one represents one of the exiles. So he's like experiencing all of history. So he's very involved with the angels, but at a certain point, God begins to speak to him. And remember, when he wakes up, he says, God was in this place and I didn't know it. It was only at the end of the dream that he realized that God was part of his dream all along. Only at the end, God begins to speak to him. So this is also Yaakov's experience of the Merkavah. And that's why these two verses of God speaking, and both of them are the name Elokim, just like in creation, the first verse of the Torah, and also before the Ten Commandments. This idea, though, of different ways to experience the Merkavah. Okay, now I want to add one more idea here. This is a very important idea because when you use a model or a paradigm, sometimes there'll be other paradigms that seem to contradict. Let's say you use the paradigm of God's name being 4 letters, and you find 100 different correspondences of other 4s. And then you realize, well, there's really a 5th level to God's name, the Kotsosho Yud. And then you find all these connections to 5. And you'll say, well, wait a minute. I thought God's name was only connected to 4s. It all depends on the context. They're not contradictory whatsoever. It's within that particular context. So we just learned this idea of the ascending level of learning. First, there's Tanakh, and then there's Mishnah, and then there's Gemara, and then there's Maaseh Bereshit, and then there's Maaseh Merkavah. Maaseh Merkavah was the highest. But here, Rav Ginsburg explains there's another model here where there is something higher than Maaseh Merkavah. And this is connected to the teaching that the Mashiach, the soul of Mashiach, taught the Baal Shem Tov, that all of reality is manifest on 3 different levels: Olamot, Neshamot, Elokut. Worlds, souls, and divinity. And they're all happening at the same time. In other words, within physical material reality, you have souls, us, operating within the world, physical material world, and within the physical material world and the world of souls, of course, God is all present. So that's what's called world, souls, and divinity, Olamot, Neshamot, and Elokut. So Rav Ginsburg explains that, again, in a different context, these 3 levels correspond to 3 very high levels of learning. And I don't know if you remember, but when we were learning, I think 2 weeks ago, teachings from the Gemara, and we learned the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and how his student, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, elaborated on Maaseh Merkavah. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai praised him to high heaven. And then there was another story. And Rabbi Yochanan said that there are 3 divisions of learning. Again, a different context. What are those 3? We learned this already. There are those who learn Torah on more of a simple level. No mysticism, no Kabbalah, no Hasidut. This is not a negative statement. They learn the revealed aspects of the Torah. And then there is the second level is those who learn the deeper understandings of the Torah. And then the third level was Maaseh Merkavah. Now Rav Ginsburg gives us a different paradigm, but an important one. And he says the worlds, Olamot, this obviously is Maaseh Bereshit, the workings of creation. In creation, the worlds are created. The souls are Maaseh Merkavah. And this we learned already throughout everything, is the whole idea of Maaseh Merkavah is that human beings are murkav, are complex, are the brain. This is what we talked about. The brain is the most complex entity in the created world. And as I mentioned before, with all of the hype about AI and any time now quantum computers, well, who created them? Human beings. So as much as like AI, but who created AI? So neshamot, souls, are maseh Merkavah. So that gets us to the top of everything we've learned. But Rav Ginsburg says there's really one more level. And that's what's called Sod Hashem, the secrets of God. And this is what's called in especially Chabad Hasidut, Atzmut, the essence of God, beyond God's names, beyond anything that we can even describe, is the essence of God. And we're told that the closest we got was at Sinai, where God revealed the closest to his essence to human beings in all of recorded history. And Sod Hashem Lirei Av means the secret of God, but it also means the secret of God's name. And even though we connected the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei intrinsically to Maaseh Merkavah, but there's a level above the ideas that we discussed and the essence of God. And so Rav Ginsburg brings an amazing gematria here. He says if you take these three levels of learning, Maaseh Bereshit, Maaseh Merkavah, and Sod Hashem, the gematria of those three types of not just learning, but experience is 2,106. And that equals, now if you look at the 10 Commandments, the first two words of the 10 Commandments are Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am God. I am Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, your God. And Anochi, we're told, stands for Ana Nafshei Kativit Yahavit. I took myself and wrote myself down. Anochi is 4 letters, meaning I took my essence and I wrote it down in the Torah, and I'm now giving it to you. So Rav Ginsburg reveals that if you take the word Anochi and you multiply it times Hashem, the next word equals exactly 2,106. Equals Maaseh Bereshit, Maaseh Merkavah, and Sod Hashem. So in a certain way, at Sinai, all of these levels were revealed simultaneously. That's why we say that the 7 heavens opened up, all the dimensions merged together. We could see what ordinarily could only be heard. We all had a mass experience of Maaseh Merkavah. L'chaim, everyone. And now the concluding words. As I said before, in my mind, this is the most important thing that we have learned the entire time. And that is, what do we do with all of this learning about Maaseh Merkavah? What does it mean to us today? How can we connect to it? That is the absolute essence. We've learned all along that Maaseh Merkavah is a level of consciousness. That's what it is. And we learned that the secret, why it was such a secretive type of learning, it wasn't so much in the learning, it was in the methodology of how to reach those levels of consciousness that one can have those kind of experiences called Maaseh Merkavah. That was the secret knowledge that was handed down in a certain way. That was a secret. And we know it's through meditation. We discussed the Arba Shenichnasu Pardes, the four that went into the Pardes. We talked about how the Avot experienced Maaseh Merkavah even tonight at Sinai, Yaakov's dream, God ascending from speaking to Avram and Yaakov. All of this is part of a certain type of meditative methodologies that get us to a certain level of consciousness where we experience learning about Maaseh Merkavah. And each person's Maaseh Merkavah is different. It's not like, it's very different than Maaseh Bereshit, where it's very much connected to the text. And here, even, and we've said this all along, no matter how important the first chapter of Ezekiel is to the whole subject of Maaseh Merkavah, it's not in the learning of those words and verses. Obviously, that's the foundation, but it's the experience that one gets having learned those ideas. It's the experience. Maaseh Merkavah is an experiential type of, I'm redundant here, experience, an experiential type of experience. That makes a lot of sense, but it does. So here, the idea for each and every person, and I want to mention also that every day in our prayers, we remember say Merkavah, because every day we say Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzavakot, Melok HaOretz Kavodo. Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts. The whole world is full of his glory. That comes from Yeshayahu, Isaiah's vision of the Merkavah. And what do we respond? Really, we're actually imitating the angels. What do they respond? Baruch kavod Hashem mimakomo. Blessed is the glory of God from his place. That comes from Yechezkel, 3rd chapter. So every day in our prayers, we're incorporating the words of Maaseh Merkavah. But what about the experience? Are we experiencing it as we're saying it? That would be Maaseh Merkavah. I hope everyone gets this. To say the words, that's one thing, that's the foundation. But it's the experience or the level of consciousness that we have while we're saying those words, or how those words can be, listen carefully, the Merkavah for us to have a higher level of consciousness from saying those words. The words become the Merkavah. Now, if you take that idea and we expand it, this becomes how we can live these teachings every single day. Every prayer then becomes a chariot to bring us to a higher level of consciousness. And just like Yechezkel, after everything he experienced, ultimately, he had a vision of the glory of God. Well, what are we told even in the Shulchan Aruch? When we step into the Amida, we should imagine that we're standing before the Shekhinah. Like for real. This is not Kabbalah. This is the Shulchan Aruch. We should imagine, and it actually says in the Shulchan Aruch that if we pray properly, that we can reach levels similar to prophecy. That is the Merkavah that we need to integrate in our lives. Now let's go back to bracha. Remember, Bet Resh Chaf is one of the permutations of Merkavah of the same three-letter root is bracha. We say 100 brachas a day. Now, we should all ask ourselves, I do myself all the time, how many of those 100 blessings is being a chariot for us to reach a higher level of consciousness? Each one of them is designed to be a Merkavah for us. Every prayer, every blessing is a potential Merkavah. So even though what I'm saying is in short, it is the essence of everything that we've been learning. And then, if we take it just one step further, and actually Rav Ginsburg says these very words, that learning Torah is Ma'aseh Merkavah. Every time we learn Torah, especially what's called on the inside, doesn't have to be on the inside, meaning is you're sitting with a text and you're looking at the letters and the words, and you're entering in to the chariot of the Torah. The Torah itself is the Merkavah. Now, one other point, and that is also in our prayers every day in Ubalat Sion, we say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh 2 different times in the morning prayers. It's also part of we say it 3 times if you have a minyan. It's part of Kedusha. The first 2 times, it's imitating the angels. We're saying that this is how the angels praise you, and we want to praise you like the angels praise you. So in other words, we're like imitating the angels. But when we come to Balat Sion, so it says like this. It says, V'ata Kadosh, you are holy, Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael. Can't even tell you how important these few words are for everything that we've learned. We say, you are holy, sitting on the praises of Israel. What does that mean? God is sitting on the praises of Israel. It means, up to now, I said prayer was a chariot for us to reach higher consciousness. Blessings are a chariot for us. The Torah, learning the Torah is a chariot. This reverses it. We are now the chariot for who? For God. Before, it's as if God, by giving us the Torah, He gave us the means to ride the chariot. But here, it is saying that, I'll read the words again. Ve'ata kadosh, you are holy. Yoshev tehilot Yisrael, you sit on the praises of Israel. Ve'kara zeh el zeh, ve'amar kadosh, 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 Hashem tzavakot, melok kol haaretz kavodo. This time, we're saying it. We're not saying it in the context that we're imitating the angels. Now we're saying it. And God, the sages are telling us that the way God relates to it is He's riding on our praises. And so here, this is very similar to last week's Parsha, when Abraham is initiated to the covenant with God through circumcision. But as an introduction, God says, walk, give me a second. I want to get this right. Give me a second. One second. It says like this. V'yara Hashem el Avram. God appeared to Avram. V'yomer alav, and he said to him, Ani kel shakai. But these are the 4 words I wanted to get to. Hitalech lefanai v'hayet tamim. Walk before me and be pure of heart. Now, all the commentaries point out it all about Noach and about Hanoch. Both of them, it says that they walked with God. Pretty high level. Hanoch and Noach walked with God. But here God says to Avram, Hitalech lefanai, walk before me. That's like saying, God is saying, I am your chariot, but your task in the world is to be my chariot. Did everyone get how significant that is? How deep that is? And this is very similar to David. The Arizal revealed, the Torah reveals, there was no greater prophet ever than Moshe. But the Ari says the greatest person with Ruach HaKodesh was David. There was no one ever who had as much divine inspiration as David. We see that from the Tehillim. And so some of the Tehillim begin Mizmor LeDavid, a song to David, and others begin LeDavid Mizmor, to David a song. So the sages say, what's the difference? And they say when it says Mizmor LeDavid, this is when David is just catching the spiritual influx of energy. Mizmor LeDavid. LeDavid Mizmor is when David would dig very deep inside and he'd become inspired and a song would come out of him. So this is very similar to these 2 types of Merkavah, these 2 types of chariots that I'm trying to explain here. And that's how we're going to end our series, is there's a level where we need to connect to the Torah, to tefillah, to blessings, to meditation, to nature, to praising God. And that becomes our chariot that brings us to God, brings us to higher consciousness. Anytime we're talking about higher consciousness, it means that are bringing us to God. But there's also the level where, especially, God has appointed, has blessed the Jewish people to be his chariot in this world. That is our role. And that's why when we talk about possible reasons why God created the world, so we're told that the highest one, the most enigmatic one, is God had a desire to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds. Well, how does God have a dwelling place in the lower world? Obviously, God made the world. But what it's really teaching us is, in a certain way, God has made us part of him, and he wants and desires us to be his chariot. We need to draw godliness into the world. We need to be the chariot of goodness and love and light and rectification and healing. That's our job. God gave us that job. That's why the last word of creation is la'asot. Asher bara Elokim la'asot. That God made to do. Everyone else, what do you mean made to do? It's redundant. You don't need the word la'asot. That God made. And it's explained, la'asot is God is putting it on human beings, and especially the Jewish people, to be his partner in rectifying the world and bringing godliness into the world and making a place for God to be in the lower worlds. And so therefore, in a certain way, the purpose of all creation is to be a chariot to bring God down into our lives, into our hearts, into our consciousness, into our minds, into the physical material world. And that is what will be revealed in the Messianic era. That type of God consciousness, but also all of the prophets promised that God would reveal himself in a way that we haven't seen yet. The closest we saw were the few minutes at Sinai. But that's what we're told. The Messianic era is that God will reveal his essence in a way, and once that is revealed, it will be our higher level of consciousness. It will merge together, the two chariots, chariot from above and our chariot from below. May we merit to see it. We merit to do our part to bring that godliness into the world, but also to integrate all of these teachings into our own lives on a daily level, and to be able to see every bracha, every prayer, every moment as a chariot to bring us to God.